Assalamualaikum dan salam hormat. Selamat datang ke episod terakhir Wicara menjelang Hari Mengundi. Saya Basir Siswo. Setelah 8 hari berkempen, kita sudah sampai di Ambang Hari Mengundi Pilihan Raya 2025 pada hari Sabtu ini, 3 Mei. Esok adalah hari meredakan fikiran atau cooling off day setelah melalui kempen pilihan raya yang saya kira paling sengit dan hangat sejak lebih 40 tahun lalu. Semua pihak tidak lagi dibenarkan berkempen esok. Ini adalah untuk memberi peluang para pengundi berehat dan merenung sejenak siapa sebenarnya calon yang akan dipilih untuk mewakili suara hati mereka. Dalam episod ini, kita akan membincangkan isu-isu penting yang akan mempengaruhi cara rakyat mengundi dan beberapa senario yang mungkin terjadi sekiranya lebih ramai pembangkang dipilih ke Parlimen. Bersama saya hari ini ialah Encik Abdul Rahman Muhammad Said dan Encik Nizam Ismail, Pengasas bersama Suara Melayu Singapura, dan juga kami mengundang Encik Jabbar Hanief, mantan wartawan kanan yang berpengalaman pernah bertugas di Akhbar Berita Harian dan SBC. Izinkan saya memulakan perbincangan. Sebagai seorang pengundi, saya agak kesal dan hairan mengapa PAP tidak memberi respons yang meyakinkan untuk menangani 3 isu penting yang hangat dibincangkan dalam pilihan raya ini, iaitu kos sara hidup, harga rumah flat yang semakin di luar kemampuan, dan dasar membawa masuk terlalu ramai pekerja asing dari India di bawah skim SECA. Mengapa PAP gagal berbuat demikian dalam raya? Biasanya, parti yang memerintah akan menjanjikan berbagai huraian untuk mengatasi masalah kehidupan rakyat. Seperti kata peribahasa Melayu, umpama musim menanam tebu di tepi bibir. Pandangan Encik Abdul Rahman.
Saya juga agak hairan kenapa isu-isu hangat ini tidak ditimbulkan. Malah kita lihat dari pihak PAP lebih mengambil masa untuk mengkritik lawan-lawannya. Sedangkan isu-isu ini merupakan isu nasi, bread and butter, bagi kebanyakan rakyat, terutamanya rakyat kaum Melayu Islam yang rata-ratanya menduduki tempat paling bawah di dalam demografik sosioekonomi. Jadi ini merupakan satu misteri. Seharusnya isu-isu ini diperdebatkan, dibincangkan, atau sekurang-kurangnya diberi perhatian, tapi ternyata tak terjadi.
Jabbar?
Ya, ini satu hal yang menjadi tanda tanya bagi kebanyakan orang. Kita sama-sama telah banyak mendengar, banyak melihat, malah kita melalui zaman-zaman itu di mana kita melihat bagaimana pengundi melalui zaman-zaman yang agak sukar. Tapi sayangnya setelah kita telah hampir sekarang sudah 60 tahun, kita tidak mendengar satu pun anggota parlimen dari pemerintah membincangkan tentang soal bread and butter. Tidak ada satu saranan yang kita dengar yang mengatakan, ya, ini barang mahal, sewa mahal, kos sara hidup mahal, tinggi. Bagaimana orang kita melalui? Kan? Lebih-lebih lagi bagi masyarakat Islam, masyarakat Melayu. Kebetulan saya tadi duduk dalam MRT. Saya terserempak dengan guru saya. Jadi beliau bertanyakan tentang election, tentang pilihan raya ini. Jadi kita berbual sedikit. Tanpa saya sedari, di sebelah saya ada seorang pemuda, kebetulan pemuda Cina. Umur 30 tahun, kata dia. Dia langsung menyampuk, mengatakan, saya setuju dengan pendapat awak. I agree with you, katanya. So saya tanya dia, yang mana satu yang you setuju? Terus dia cakap, bila you berumur 40 tahun dulu, you sudah ada semuanya. You sudah ada rumah, you sudah ada keluarga, you sudah ada pekerjaan yang stabil. Tapi saya sekarang umur 30 tahun, kalau saya sampai umur 40 tahun, saya mungkin belum punya rumah, saya belum mampu untuk mempunyai keluarga, apatah lagi pekerjaan katanya. Kerja-kerja kita sekarang, kalau ada 10 orang, 6 orang dari luar. Kalau ada 20 orang, 16 orang dari luar. Makin besar pekerjaan organisasi, makin ramai pekerja dari luar. Jadi dia bilang, di mana kita nanti sekarang? Jadi inilah dia bilang, satu perkara yang dia melihat bahawa parti pemerintah tidak begitu memberi perhatian. Kan? Memang betul kalau dia berucap, dia mengatakan, ya kita prihatin tentang ini, kita prihatin tentang ini. Tapi dia tidak pernah menyatakan bagaimana solusinya. Kan? Anak sekolah primary pergi sekolah bawa $10. Balik rumah mengadu lapar. Bagaimana ini keadaan ini? Jadi inilah di antara perkara-perkara yang saya fikir harus dibahaskan. Dan inilah masanya. Inilah masanya untuk kita membahaskan perkara-perkara ini. Bukan seperti apa yang saya dengar semalam di Toa Payoh, membanggakan kejayaan, pencapaian yang dibuat, menyiapkan infrastruktur ini, menyiapkan infrastruktur itu. Dan orang yang mendengar tercengang. Saya sendiri mengatakan, apa ada kena-mengena covered walkways tu dengan saya.
Nizam, your thoughts?
Let me speak in English for the benefit of our non-Malay speaking viewers. I think on the issue of cost of living, you get a sense. I agree with Pak Jabbar that you don't hear enough from the ruling party that they are addressing these issues and actually offering solutions to Pak Rahman's point. I mean, core at this is the issue of GST, kenaikan GST. And then it happened twice over the last 5 years, 8 and 9%. And I think that there is a sense of detachment that these policymakers don't really understand the daily pains of Singaporeans. Everything gets more expensive. Water, coffee, your basic necessity needs. Or you go to a food court and buy food or go to a hawker center. Prices have gone up quite substantially. In the beginning, PM Lawrence Wong said that there's not much we can do. That's the essence of what he's saying. There's not much we can do because we are an open economy. We need the GST. We've looked at all the options, but we have to increase it. So our focus is on raising incomes. That sort of shifted, the messaging sort of shifted over the course of the campaign. They did say they understand the concerns about cost of living, but it begs the question, as Pak Jabbar said, what are you doing about this? This whole argument that you have no choice but to raise GST, it sort of rings hollow because there was a budget surplus of $6.4 billion in 2024. Why did we need to raise GST to that amount? I mean, it's always the same argument that you hear. We need to protect our reserves. We need to build it up for the benefit of future generations of Singaporeans. But the current generation is suffering, right? I mean, if your example, school children, with pocket money of $10, they come back and they're still hungry because it might not be enough because, kids now have got CCAs and all that in school. I think those are very real pain points that you don't get a sense of empathy from the PAP MPs. There has been a couple of proposals from the opposition parties. Why don't we exempt GST for essential goods? I have not heard a credible argument for the APP. Why the PAP leadership? Why they can't do that? Those are very existential things for Singaporeans. Not to mention housing, which is ridiculous, terribly expensive right now, and you spend your entire working life paying off your mortgage for public housing, which is crazy. And then you mentioned, Pak Basir, you mentioned the issue of immigration. One of the things I realized is that we have crossed the 6 million mark of resident population in Singapore. Remember way back in 2012, there was argument about this population white paper. There was a big hue and cry about the 6.9 million population target. We are now at 6 million. And it's really the fact that immigration, whilst necessary, we all acknowledge that, but it's the way that it has been done. It was completely opaque in terms of...
The statistics I read was 40% of the working population are foreigners. That's serious, isn't it?
Yeah, that's staggering. And will we become a Dubai, at some stage? But the issue is transparency. How are you treating immigration from various parts of the world? Because we have heard that immigration is a policy tool that they use to maintain the racial balance. So what does it mean? Does it mean that you therefore, in order to prop up certain ethnic populations, you might apply a more relaxed set of rules? And nobody knows what the rules are for this group of ethnic immigrants. Whereas for other groups of ethnic immigrants, you might apply harsher or more stringent standards. Nobody knows. So transparency is important. And I really think that we should not try to use immigration as a tool to maintain ethnic populations, because that just causes all kinds of other problems.
The big question I have is, why don't the government, at least during the election campaigning, right, assure Singaporeans that, okay, we will do a major review of the immigration policy to make sure that Singaporeans comes first in terms of employment? Why was there this big silence?
I think they are actually overconfident. They think that they can just pull through and say whatever you want, and then this is what I think is good for you. You take it or you leave it.
It's a question of empathy or lack of. A question of connectedness with the people. It's easy to say, we compensate you with all kinds of subsidies and vouchers, but PAP doesn't seem to realize that when you raise the GST by 2%, prices on the ground go up by 5, 10, sometimes 20%. And that added burden, nobody covers that added burden. Burden is real on the part of the people.
Yeah, the irony was, you see, like transport.
So it's a matter of
expenses,
connectedness. Is the PAP or are the PAP candidate really connected with their constituents? And obviously, you tell me, I give you, we take a chicken wing from you and you get back a whole, come on.
No, the irony is that even PAP leaders are saying, the PM, I remember him saying that GST hardly affects the livelihood of normal citizens. I think that's a strange argument, because once you raise GST, rental goes up, everything goes up. Like, it's basic economics, right?
Yeah, it's tone deaf. And to your point, Pak Rahman, about GST vouchers, there's as some of the opposition parties, there's putting a band-aid on a over a very huge wound.
And now they're giving away what? Fish, eggs. It reminds me of are we third world country? You literally beg us to go to the void deck and get these free
in the early
giveaways.
In the early days, when we have difficulty in having food on our table, during election also, we don't get
such things.
And then now you have almost everything, and yet you are giving away all these kind of goodies. What do you think of us?
I mean, there's a more fundamental point, right? Who's funding these $1 eggs, right? Because somebody has to fund it.
And toothbrush as well.
Yeah, so it's...
Who's funding? Ultimately, it's us.
I think it's tone deaf, right? I mean, you don't get a sense that the PAP is really listening, empathizing, and feeling the pain of a lot of Singaporeans. And that's the anger that you see. I'm just looking through social media posts, and I think the difference this time around is, I think the anger is very, very manifest. The anger is anger. And I don't think this is being sufficiently addressed by the ruling party.
Correct. So selain daripada isu GST, kos sara hidup, banyak juga isu tentang credibility dan kepimpinan dibahaskan dalam pilihan raya kali ini. Antaranya ialah pemilihan calon daripada para pegawai pangkat tinggi, pasukan tentera dan juga perkhidmatan awam. Saya terbaca seorang penalisis menyifatkan langkah memilih terlalu ramai golongan seperti ini sebagai sindrom the highly educated scholars but dangerously detached from the masses. Ini menguatkan lagi tanggapan bahawa kepimpinan PAP bersifat elitis dan tidak memahami masalah kehidupan seharian. Your thoughts, Nizam?
I think it's a valid point. If you look at the slate of the PAP, you still see, I think they're probably overrepresented, former public servants, former senior civil servants, army generals, NTUC, right? Chee Hong Tat at the televised debate said NTUC is independent. So yeah, right. Just as the People's Association is independent, right? Because you see the rate that NTUC candidates are being put as political candidates, and if they don't win, we put you back at the NTUC as a safe shelter for you until the next general election. That's been happening. But I think importantly is the psyche of a former public servant, a former general, and a former NTUC person. There is a sense of
Groupthink.
Yes, groupthink is a sense of subservience, right, to authority. That's in your DNA. You're not going to rock the boat. So the question is, what is the role of an MP? I think the PAP thinks that the role of an MP is, you become an office holder, we promote you, we pay you your big fat salaries, and then also, there's quite a sizable chunk of MPs who are office holders. And then for the others, you ask your token questions, but we expect you to support government policy. So when people interview you during budget debates, you say, it's a fantastic budget, things like that. But I think there's a mismatch with what the electorate expects, because there is a lot more sophistication, there is a lot more knowledge amongst the electorate. People expect MPs to ask the hard questions. So when they ask the hard questions, it's really accountability. And you get a sense that the PAP might be a little bit uncomfortable with accountability. And this is really, sad, because clearly the party is not infallible. They make mistakes. Sometimes they are huge mistakes, right? For instance, the Allianz acquisition of NTUC for $2.2 billion. Luckily, it didn't get through, but it could have gone through. And you see the letters from the former CEO of NTUC itself, claiming there are serious governance lapses. These are basic 101 due diligence. If you want to decrease your capital after the acquisition, that should have been picked up earlier. So you almost sold off your national insurance company, which is a very strong social mission. So it's accountability really that you're looking for, and people expect members of parliament to raise hard questions in parliament, but the PAP doesn't seem to understand this. Of course, there are PAP MPs like Louis Ng, who is unfortunately not contesting this time around, and before this, Inderjit Singh, who would ask the hard questions. They had the courage and the fortitude to ask those kind of questions. But if you look at the statistics prepared by CAPE, which is doing excellent work, in looking at how MPs are performing in parliament, you can see that generally it's the opposition parties that gives you the bang for the buck. They ask more questions, they ask harder questions. So it goes back to that, right? So when you have these people who are former public servants, can they really ask the hard questions?
Or do they dare ask the hard questions?
I think the mismatch goes further than that. We have to go back to this $1 million salaried ministers. What the rationale of giving ministers $1 million salaries? One is to prevent them from being corrupt, which has been proven to be faulty. But more importantly, the argument in those days was to match the salaries of the ministers with some of the top CEOs in the private sector. The idea is to be able to attract talent from the private sector to become ministers. We see, even given this current slate, generals, top officers, civil servants, we get very few of the talent from the private sector.
Almost none.
Almost none. But more importantly is the accountability. If you are a CEO in a private sector company, you are accountable to your shareholders. Not every 5 years, but every year, every quarter even, given the quarterly results. We don't find that kind of accountability among our ministers here. So the whole rationale of awarding or rewarding our ministers with $1 million salaries seriously needs to be examined and re-examined.
Saya kira soal anggota parlimen pemerintah bertanyakan sesuatu is almost tak ada. Mereka menganggap bahawa yang akan bertanya hanya opposition. Kan? Mereka datang ke parlimen untuk mendengar, kemudian bukan menyuarakan keluhan pengundi, tapi mereka menyampaikan apa yang tak disampaikan oleh pemerintah kepada ini. Jadi saya nampak kurang berkesan anggota-anggota parlimen pemerintah kurang berkesan. Jadi tidak heranlah kalau mereka mengambil calon-calon daripada Army General, daripada civil servant. Ini orang-orang ni memang kita sudah tahu, kan? Memang kerja dia berbeza dengan orang calon-calon daripada swasta, kan, yang diambil dari swasta. Mereka sendiri dengan secara sukarela mau tampil ke hadapan untuk menyuarakan sesuatu, kan? Jadi sekarang ini sudah jadi satu anggapan bahawa kita tidak boleh mengharapkan anggota parlimen pemerintah bertanyakan soalan-soalan yang benar-benar itu menyentuh perasaan, menyentuh keadaan hidup pengundi. Kita tak boleh harapkan. Ini saya terus terang saja cakap. Seperti saya katakan tadi, kita telah membaca, kita telah mendengar dan kita telah melalui apa yang mereka lakukan selama ini. Kan? Cuma berapa ketul aja yang boleh dan berani menyuarakan sesuatu. Dan kalau dia bersuara pun tidak menyentuh kita, tidak memberi jawapan kepada apa yang menjadi kemuskilan bagi kita.
Kalau saya boleh berkongsi sedikitlah tentang sikap elitis para pemimpin dan ahli parlimen. Mungkin mereka perlu menggunakan pengangkutan awam MRT dan bas untuk memahami suara hati dan masalah rakyat biasa. Pengalaman saya sendiri sejak saya berhijrah dan pulang ke Singapura sebulan sekali sejak 15 tahun lalu, saya akan menggunakan pengangkutan awam. Dari Pasir Ris naik MRT ke Raffles Place umpamanya, berdiri. Dan dalam bahasa berdiri dalam 40 minit itu, kita dapat merasakan denyutan nadi masyarakat biasa. Ramainya warga pekerja asing dalam MRT itu berasak-rasak setiap pagi. Dan naik pula bas feeder dari blok ke interchange. Mungkin sebulan sekali lah para pemimpin kita perlu menjalani pengalaman itu untuk merasakan bagaimana rakyat biasa hidup. Jangan terlalu mengharapkan memandu kereta sendiri yang mewah ke pejabat. Sebulan sekali lah sekurang-kurangnya. Itu saja saya mungkin merasakan mereka boleh mengalami apa yang dirasakan oleh orang bawahan. Bukan setakat ke kedai kopi bersarapan waktu kempen pilihan raya.
Saya setuju. Kalau kita dalam konteks masyarakat Melayu Islam sendiri, kalau kita tinjau sejarah, ya, ada sultan, ada sahabat, ada khalifah yang berjalan di kalangan ramai incognito, tanpa diketahui rakyat, supaya mereka dapat mengetahui denyutan nadi masyarakat ataupun rakyat, keluhan rakyat. Saya rasa ini perlu. Kalau hari ini seorang MP pergi walkabout ke pasar, dia akan diiringi dengan rombongan sebelumnya.
Foto op, Rahman. Foto op
lagi. Jadi MP itu tak akan dapat merasakan denyutan nadi, keprihatinan, pahit geringnya rakyat hidup seharian. Jadi memang perlu ada. Ini akan menghakis rasa elitis MP-MP ataupun para pemimpin kita.
Ini pengalaman saya lah, ya. Saya dah cover pilihan raya ini dah sejak dari tahun 80-an. Dari waktu saya di SBC sampai saya di akhbar. Yang saya pernah dengar dan pernah saya tanyakan kepada MP pemerintah, malah pada menteri, apakah feedback yang diberi oleh orang-orang di sekeliling mereka itu benar atau tidak? Sebab yang saya dengar, ini pengalaman, di satu kawasan undi, saya tak payah sebut di mana, satu kawasan undi, memang the ground memang sudah keruh. Bila menteri ini datang tanya, how's the ground? Jawapannya terus terang saya bilang, bagus. Everything is taken care of. Jadi saya berpeluang bertanya kepada menteri itu, apakah menteri percaya apa yang dikatakan oleh orang-orang di sekelilingnya? Saya pernah tanyakan begitu. Dan saya disuruh diam. Ini saya buka. Ini pengalaman saya. Saya disuruh diam. Jadi inilah, oleh kerana kadang-kadang kita mau salahkan menteri pun tak boleh. Kan? Kita tidak boleh mengharapkan juga menteri ini jalan pergi pasar pergi sana. Kan? Tapi kalau dia mendapatkan feedback yang betul, yang tepat daripada orang-orang di sekelilingnya yang tugas mereka itu harus memberikan feedback yang betul, saya rasa masalah gini tidak timbul.
Masalahnya grassroots semua yes man. Mereka takut kalau dikatakan orang tak happy, kurang senang dengan MP, ada masalah, dia mencerminkan mereka gagal melakukan tanggungjawab untuk menyenangkan kehidupan komuniti. Itu masalahnya. Terlalu banyak yes man. Okey, dalam pilihan raya 2020, parti yang memerintah memenangi hanya 61% PAP. Undi popular, antara yang paling rendah dalam sejarah. Workers Party menang 10 kerusi parlimen. Jumlah paling banyak untuk parti pembangkang. Keputusan pilihan raya 2020 itu menunjukkan trend bahawa lebih ramai rakyat Singapura mahukan perubahan dan suara alternatif di parlimen, terutama golongan muda yang tidak ada emotional dan historical baggage. Namun kelihatan dalam pilihan raya kali ini, PAP masih menggunakan, saya rasalah, strategi berkempen tahun 80-an dan 90-an. Dengan kenyataan seperti jika PAP tidak memerintah, Singapura akan mengalami banyak masalah ekonomi dan sebagainya. Jabbar dan saya kita pernah membuat liputan pilihan raya sejak tahun 80-an dan 90-an. Kami melalui proses itu. Tapi malangnya PAP belum berubah setelah hampir 40 tahun. Pandangan Cik Rahman.
Ya, saya dalam setiap episod Wicara ni saya kemukakan 3 gelombang ataupun 3 tekanan terhadap seseorang pengundi. Ya. Fear, uncertainty, doubt. Ada pihak-pihak yang akan menerapkan rasa takut, rasa was-was, rasa curiga, supaya mereka pengundi itu akan mengundi parti-parti tertentu. Dan saya rasa pengundi harus sedar akan 3 kuasa ini yang akan mempengaruhi pilihan mereka. Jika tidak, mereka akan ikut arus lah, ditakut-takutkan, diisi dengan rasa was-was. Ya. Apakah ini suatu yang boleh dielakkan? Saya rasa ini natural bagi setiap parti. Yang bagusnya parti pembangkang tidak mengamalkan rasa takut ini, sistem takut ini seperti parti pemerintah. Ya.
Nizam, your thoughts?
On the issue of the kind of politicking that we have seen during the elections, interestingly, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong made a point that we should move away from negative politics. I think he was trying to defend the questions or issues that were being posed to DPM Gan Kim Yong, right? Arising especially from the whole NTUC thing, the whole NTUC saga. But I think there are a couple of points from this. Firstly, you are confusing hard questions on accountability on the NTUC issue, which are very legitimate questions, as personal attacks. These are not personal attacks. These are important questions of accountability because you are looking at the sale of your national insurance firm, right? But even on the issue of negative politics, the irony is this. Not everybody seemed to have gotten the memo. Because when Lawrence Wong said this, he forgot that Ong Ye Kung had just a couple of days before that made this quite nonsensical assertion that Chee Soon Juan had abandoned Bukit Batok, right? That's a personal attack, isn't it? Because they've always viewed Dr. Chee as some form of a political bogeyman, some fear that or paranoia that he would make it to Parliament. But he forgot that he left Bukit Batok because of the EBRC. It exists in a different form. Yeah. So I don't think Dr. Chee wanted to leave Bukit Batok. He spent 9 years there. Okay, that's one. The other thing is, Ong Ye Kung also forgot that he actually abandoned Aljunied. So you are equally guilty of that. And then there's a whole musical chairs, right? Tan Si Ling abandoning his ward and going to Choa Chu Kang, and that's because Gan Kim Yong had moved across from Choa Chu Kang to Punggol. So, it's really pot calling the kettle black. And then when he realized it, he said, okay, let's move on. Let's not discuss this. So, personal attacks unfortunately have happened, right? And then I must touch on the issue of religion and politics because it's effectively a personal attack on Faisal Manap. Now, the PAP made a huge dramatization over the fact that Faisal Manap met one of the asatizahs, Noor Daros, or maybe not a certified asatizah, in a meeting. That was it, right? No promises were made. Even Noor Daros said the Workers' Party never agreed or made promises on anything. Now, the escalation this was deemed to be a mixing of politics and religion. So you see Lawrence Wong stopping his campaign, making this press statement, and then SM Lee Hsien Loong coming to the fore and making very strong statements and even referring to Tang Liang Hong, which is a very unfortunate reference because we know what happened for Tang Liang Hong. Pak Jabbar would know this as well, and you yourself, Pak Basir. So that was ridiculous. In actual truth, the PAP MPs, they meet the asatizahs regularly. We all know that. In fact, we have a minister in charge of Muslim affairs. No other religion has this, but the concept of putting a minister in charge of the religion, isn't that not mixing politics and religion? We have the Majlis Ugama Islam Singapore, the Islamic Religious Council, which is a statutory board that reports to the minister. Isn't that not conflating politics and religion? But worse still, I think we see statements made by PAP candidates that seem to directly do that. Ong Ye Kung made a promise he will preserve Masjid Tempatan Melayu, the mosque, a lovely mosque in Sembawang. Come on.
Jaminan lagi.
Yeah, and that story is splashed all over in Berita Harian and Berita Media Corp. That's not mixing politics and religion. And just like last night, there was a report on the rally made by Miss Mariam Jaafar. She was saying, okay, we will give bursaries to lower income persons, including madrasah students. Why the need to highlight that? And they will support the formation of a Karya group, which is a religious group. Come on, that's not mixing politics and religion. So it's a matter of double standards, right? You make this personal attack on Faisal Manap, but you're doing it as well. So where is the consistency in principles? What actually is your stance?
Pak Jabbar?
I think soal ini
strategi lama untuk pengundi baru.
Kita tak boleh nak ketepikan soal menyentuh hal-hal yang ada kaitan dengan agama. Bukan kerana kita nak mencampur adukkan agama dengan politik. Tapi bukankah ini masanya untuk kita menyuarakan sesuatu, kan? Bagi masyarakat Melayu, contoh soal tudung, kan? Apa salah ke kalau kita menyuarakan tentang peri pentingnya membolehkan wanita Islam memakai tudung, kan? Dan kalaupun hal ini ditanyakan kepada menteri, kan? Beri aja jawapan yang jelas. Ya, harus. Itu orang mau buat, tak mau buat, mau pakai, tak mau pakai, soal kedua. Kan? Kalau saya, tak silap saya lah, orang Kristen ditanyakan tentang family planning, kan? Jawabnya senang aja. No. Habis.
Yang lebih meluatkan bagi diri saya, bila ada pihak MP seperti Faisal Manap menimbulkan isu seperti tudung, isu-isu yang dekat dengan hati masyarakat Melayu Islam, dikatakan jangan timbulkan isu-isu sensitif. Kalau Faisal menimbulkan isu yang sama di Parlimen, dia juga diberitahu jangan timbulkan isu-isu yang sensitif. Jadi kalau tidak boleh ditimbulkan isu yang dekat dengan hati kita, dianggap atau ditanggap sebagai sensitif, di mana kita nak menyuarakan keprihatinan kita, perasaan kita? Ini masalahnya, ironinya, double standardnya pihak PAP.
Tak, kalaupun perkara-perkara begini, mereka mengatakan mereka membincangkan di belakang tabir. Kan? Kalau menurut saya, walaupun di belakang tabir, kalau ditanya tentang soal ini, jawab terus terang aja. Kan? Jadi senang, jadi perkara itu tidak keluar. Kan? Kalau di dalam belakang tabir, berbelit-belit, nak mengatakan tak boleh, tapi berpusing-pusing sana sini, tidak ada hujungnya, tidak ada keputusan yang jelas. Jadi benda ni akan menjadi isu lah. Sebenarnya itu bukan isu sebenarnya. Itu perkara yang hak. Kan? Wanita Islam sudah balik, sudah cukup umur, pakai tudung. Bukan satu isu itu. Itu memang sudah jelas. Jadi boleh, tak boleh, you bincang aja lah belakang tabir. Kan? Jadi kita tak keluar. Ini dah sampai, dah keluar, di halayak ramai orang sudah membincangkan, baru you bilang, oh ini tak boleh campur aduk. Kan? Inilah jadi masalahnya. Kan?
Baik, ada 3 kawasan undi panas yang menjadi tumpuan pilihan raya kali ini. GRC Punggol, GRC Tampines, GRC East Coast di bahagian timur Singapura. Kelihatan dalam rapat umum atau rally, sokongan pihak pembangkang begitu hebat sehingga melimpah keluar stadium. Saya sendiri ke Bedok Stadium hari Selasa lalu dan melihat agak terperanjat orang ramai membanjiri stadium walaupun dalam keadaan hujan. Persoalannya ialah, adakah kehadiran ribuan orang dalam rapat umum itu boleh dijadikan kayu ukur petanda kemenangan? Pak Rahman, orang Tampines.
Orang Tampines. Kalau kita lihat di PRU, pilihan raya umum yang sebelumnya, 2020, 2015, kehadiran ribuan atau puluhan ribuan penonton ya di rally, selalunya bila waktu mengundi, undinya tak seramai. Seolah-olah kita kata indah kabar dari rupa. Tahun ini selain daripada kehadiran fizikal di rally, kita juga punya live streaming. Dan statistik dari live streaming itu malah melebihi apa yang kita lihat on the ground. Apakah kali ini keadaan akan berubah? Kalau saya tinjau dari komen-komen di social media, di orang celoteh orang ya, ada kemungkinan besar apa yang kita lihat dengan kehadiran di rally live stream mungkin akan menampakkan dalam jumlah undi. Mungkin keadaan akan berubah kali ini.
Nizam.
What's clear is there is an overwhelming, almost it's like attending a Taylor Swift concert, it's that kind of level of support for the Workers' Party. Who attends these rallies? Probably the residents of, that particular GRC, Workers' Party supporters who are not staying there, and also other Singaporeans who like the Workers' Party. I heard it a lot from my friends. Why Workers' Party not in the West? So there is a quite real and sizable affection for the Workers' Party. I think it's partly because, they come across as presenting a set of candidates who seem to be more relatable. There's a lot more empathy coming from the speeches of these candidates. And of course, they got very qualified candidates. I think the Workers' Party set of candidates this time round is very, very impressive, right? And, some of these candidates can easily stand up to any PAP candidate. Whether it reflects votes, I think we will only know come Saturday. But I can say this for sure that I think there is a growing sense of support for the Workers' Party. If you look at 2020, if you look at the total number of votes that the Workers' Party had head-to-head with the PAP, the Workers' Party had more votes, in like for like. And I think that number will go up this time round. So the support at these rallies, I think they are indicative of a hunger. I think there's a lot of hunger and anger as well. And people are really craving for an alternative, for checks and balances. I think don't dismiss it as an emotional support. It's not just an emotional support. I think people are smart. And that's part of the fault of the PAP. They're tone deaf, right? They don't they tend to think that people are not smart enough to be discerning on a whole myriad of issues. But Singaporeans are more sophisticated. They have more information through social media. They are exposed to different viewpoints. And I think as a country, it is a good thing, because as Singapore progresses, you really need this contestation of ideas, whether amongst the politicians or even amongst us normal Singaporeans, that is good for the country. The PAP needs to realize this and embrace this, and not just think the opposition as a hindrance or an annoyance that they have to deal with or fix. There was words used by Lee Hsien Loong.
Jabbar?
I think kalau menurut pada suasana sekarang, to a certain extent memang ada kesan, kan? Ramai orang mengikuti rapat umum. Seeing is believing. Mereka sendiri menyaksikan dan mereka sendiri mendengar, dan mereka dapat mendengar lebih lama dan lebih banyak. Kerana kalau dari media, especially pada media mainstream, kurang. Jadi mereka mahu mendengar, kan? Tapi oleh kerana ramai yang datang tu, saya rasa memang ada kesan ni. Tak banyak pun. Kalau contohlah, kalau 1,000 orang datang, mungkin 20 orang akan memberi sokongan. Apalagi kalau sekarang ini kita nampak beribu, kan, ramai sekali. Itu satu. Yang keduanya, mereka tidak puas mendengar kalau macam dari political broadcast, kan, apa yang mereka dapat cuma dengan berapa minit tu aja. Jadi mereka mahu mendengar sendiri, seperti kata Pak Nizam. Bukan saja orang yang tinggal di situ, di kawasan itu, malah dari tempat lain. Bukan saja penyokong Workers' Party, tapi mungkin dari parti-parti yang lain. Diorang nak menyaksikan sendiri. Contoh, ini ada calon baru, Alia. Mereka nak mendengar sendiri. Kan mereka tidak dapat melihat apa dari lain media, mungkin dari social media yang lain ada. Tapi seperti yang saya katakan tadi, seeing is believing. You dengar sendiri, you saksikan sendiri, bukan you buat keputusan.
It harks back to a quote that has been attributed to the late Lee Kuan Yew. He allegedly said, I cannot confirm. He allegedly said there will come a time when the PAP has become predictable, and the people will want to look at alternatives and want to consider alternatives. And that's probably how to explain what we see today, the crowds at the rallies, the tens of thousands of people watching the live streaming, that altogether forms a very large group of people, of voters.
These people who came to the rally, I think Nizam could vouch for it, since you went to Tampines, right? They are just not curious onlookers, Based on my experience in Bedok, in heavy downpour, people are going in by the thousands, bringing families, braving the rain. These are not curious onlookers. These are people who are really committed, to probably see that democracy is being upheld in these elections. Right? Your experience in Tampines?
I think it's also making a point, right? These are Singaporeans who, for whatever reasons, might be unhappy with certain policies of the PAP. It's making a point. The elections is interesting because it's a time when power shifts back to you and I, the electorate, right? There's a shift of power. And it's making a point to the ruling party. Look, we are here in numbers to make a point to you. Maybe you haven't totally gotten it right. And maybe you need to understand that you totally haven't got it right. And, we want you to listen to us. I think that's part of it as well.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, let's move to the West now. The West, where SDP is contesting, plus Dr. Tan Cheng Bock. How do you see the scenario if, for example, Dr. Tan Cheng Bock wins and Chee Soon Juan, Paul Tambaya? How do you see the scenario in Parliament if these three politicians get elected to Parliament? Your thoughts?
I think it's more than Tan Cheng Bock, right? Because there's a whole GRC at West
Yes,
Coast.
correct.
So they put their strongest candidates there, Tan Cheng Bock,
Man Wai.
Leong Man Wai, and also Hazel Phua. Those are the three strongest, and two of them has had experience as NCMPs. I think there's been some bullying of Leong Man Wai in Parliament. That's how most Singaporeans feel. But I think he's done a credible job in asking tough questions. And I think it becomes an annoyance when all these questions come to the PAP office holders. So you've got that team, and I think they got a good chance in light of previously what happened to Iswaran. Although some parts of the GRC from Taman has also come into West Coast, Jurong West GRC. But remember, Taman is not there anymore, and he was the big draw. He was the biggest vote vote recipient for the PAP, even more than the then PM. So that's interesting. Now, Paul Tambaya, I think personally, I think he's going to be good for Singapore. He's made some very excellent points in terms of healthcare.
Education.
Yeah, GE 2020, he lost by a slim margin, about 3 point something percent to the PAP MP. So I think Paul has a very, very good chance of making it to Parliament. Dr. Chee, unfortunately, is going to have a tougher battle because he has devoted 2 terms, 9 years in Bukit Batok, and then with the creature called Jerry meandering, rearing his ugly head, he is now in Sembawang West, right? It's going to be tougher for him, only because he hasn't had that runway to meet people and for people to know him. But the PAP seems to be very fearful of Dr. Chee. I mean, I think it's largely historical. If you meet Dr. Chee, he's actually a normal person, a very nice person to speak with. But if hypothetically, PSP and SDP make it to as elected representatives of the constituents, I think we'll see a very interesting parliament, right? Because the SDP, I think Paul was there with us, and he said they are seen as the more fearless one. They will ask fearlessly ask the questions in Parliament. So I think that's interesting. I think that is good for Singapore. No question should be seen as sensational or sensitive. It is a question. It is a legitimate concern. I think you got to trust that the process, right? And if for some reason they blunder in Parliament, then vote them out the next GE, right? That's why the election process is. But you got to give people a chance. You got to give a new Parliament that is more balanced, where there is more accountability, a chance.
More diverse. I think if that happens, SDP, PSP,
Workers' Party,
and Workers' Party, we will have at least 3 power blocks. WP will never join anyone else but themselves. Then there's PAP. I don't know how PSP and SDP can work together, but at some point they need to synchronize, if not coordinate, the questions and the arguments that they will bring up. But without doubt, with more parties in Parliament, it will create a more diverse atmosphere, a more diverse thinking, more than the kind of monotone that we've been accustomed to this last 60 years.
We now have 10 opposition. Imagine we have 30. What kind of parliament would you have?
30 of 90 is 1/3.
1/3. 1/3.
I think, now the PAP has a super majority, right?
Yeah.
So they're more than
they will never lose. I mean,
two-thirds-
they will still
two-thirds
rule,
presence.
whatever.
So I think ideally, if there are enough opposition members such that the PAP doesn't have 2/3 majority, that makes it very interesting, right? Because the significance, if you have a supermajority, is that you can carry out constitutional amendments very easily, and they have done so in the past, right? Historically, Professor Walter Woon once said that there's so many constitutional amendments, it's not really a constitution anymore. So that's interesting, and I think with more opposition, it creates for more checks and balances, more robust discussions, and that's exactly what Singapore needs: more accountability.
Jabbar?
Yeah, I think even though it is more hypothetical, but I think it will, if it's happen, it will give PAP a lot of problem. They have to revamp, they have to reorganize the way they conduct in the parliament.
I think it will make PAP to become even a better party because they'll be on their toes.
Yes.
Rather than taking everything for granted now, isn't it?
Or they can fix the opposition, which they have said they might do.
My wish, so to me, this election is important because it tells you the kind of politics that we want.
Right.
I think the days of personal attacks or bullying people in parliament, those days must be over. Look, Singaporeans are smarter than that, right? We can see through. I'm going to mean we can see through bullshit, right? We are smart enough to see through bullshit. And when an elected member of parliament is there, you don't bully him, right? Even if he's an opposition member, you treat him with respect because he represents the constituency that is there, that votes him into power. And I think the more opposition members there are, the more parties there are, psychologically it's hard for the PAP to say, I'm going to attack. It's harder for them to attack 3 parties compared to 1 party. So I think it's good for Singapore as a whole. That diversity, that increased accountability, that robustness of debates, it can only be better for Singapore.
Okay, gentlemen, before we go into a cooling off day, any last words, Pak Rahman? Final words.
Undi dengan bijak. Ingat tentang, remember the 3 forces that I talk about. Fear, uncertainty and doubt. When you hear something about the election, think carefully whether they fit into all these 3. Be aware and vote wisely.
Apa?
Ya, saya setuju juga. Kita harus mengundi dengan bijak. Dan inilah masanya yang terbaik untuk kita melihat satu perubahan. Kerana apa yang kita lihat sekarang, pembangkang telah mengemukakan calon-calon yang berkaliber, kan? Tidak kurang dengan apa yang diketengahkan oleh parti pemerintah. Jadi saya rasa saya berharap untuk melihat sesuatu perubahan, kan? Perubahan bukan sekadar untuk berubah, tapi perubahan kepada pembaharuan dan perbaikan.
Nizam?
I think vote not for fear. Vote for hope. Vote for the Singapore that you want.
Akhir kata, saya juga setuju mengundi dengan bijak, bukan dengan emosi dan perasaan yang tidak terkawal. Tapi yang lebih penting ialah kita semua warga Singapura yang mahukan yang terbaik untuk negara dan masa depan anak cucu kita. Walaupun mungkin kita berbeza pandangan dan fahaman politik. Sehingga bertemu lagi di lain kesempatan. Assalamualaikum dan salam hormat.